Right then guys, it's PSL here for the all 10 seasons of career mode video on F1 2020 and, for the first time ever, an all seasons of my team career. I know I'm late to the party to say this, but the all new My Team mode breathes a lot of life into the F1 series, and getting to sign drivers and engine deals is awesome. The concept of managing a team's budget is solid, but it quite quickly becomes a non-factor, and the upgrade tree is the same as ever, so much so that I'm barely even going to talk about it. Since it is 2020 and it's been far from a normal year, I kept the COVID theme running in this career as I tried to limit my calendar to tracks only that held F1 races this year. Zandvoort is an exception since, like last year, I'll be completing one race each season. This year I opted to do the all 10 seasons of Dutch Grand Prix since it's one of the new circuits and definitely the better of the two. It's also in Europe, which is where most of the real life races have taken place. Following on from the Netherlands is Spain, then Monaco, which is included to prop up the numbers, and the only reason Monaco didn't feature in the real life calendar is due to the logistical issues involved in moving the date of the street circuit event. Then it's Austria and Britain, both only once. Hungary, Belgium, Italy, Russia, and finally Abu Dhabi. Bahrain wasn't included since this was recorded way before the Bahrain Grand Prix was confirmed. To be fair, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix wasn't confirmed either, but it was a safe assumption that was going to go ahead in real life. Let's delve into the origins of my own team. So first off, I wanted to go with Shark as a main sponsor since the goal of earning 5 constructors points is pretty doable and their signing bonus is fairly good, so you get a decent amount of money at the start. However, I obviously wanted Ferrari engines since, because this game took ages to catch up with the times, they're the best. Also, like in EA's F1 Manager, and drawing a comparison to that game is never a good sign, but the price difference in engines is so small you may as well go with the best one. Sure, you have to get a better sponsor that will expect more of you, hence why I went with Pacifico, who want 25 points from us. But money quickly becomes immaterial anyway, plus a better car helps you to score more points, so why would I skimp on engines? I suppose I could have cut costs with my teammate, but that's a false economy. So I opted for Mick Schumacher since he's one of the best drivers in the $1 million bracket. Also, since there's a range of Michael Schumacher car liveries in the game, it makes a lot of sense to bring Mick Schumacher on board so I can have an all Schumacher themed team. Especially since I've made myself look like the 7-time world champion. That being said, it may not be the best strategy since my F1 2019 career wasn't very successful, and that was despite me spending half the career as Alain Prost and the other half as Ayrton Senna. I'll talk about the Dutch Grand Prix in depth in the all 10 seasons of Dutch Grand Prix video, but suffice it to say the first one went very well, and it's all down to some weird quirks in this game's difficulty. After all, it wouldn't be a Codemasters F1 game if the AI difficulty wasn't in some way inconsistent or broken. Before I go to the end of the season, I do want to give a quick mention to the Hungarian Grand Prix. Actually just before it, since by then, before the 6th race in this 100 race long career, I had upgraded all the facilities up to spec 1, and all I had to do was buy a single upgrade for each. I went with resource point generation since I feel as if that's the obvious best upgrade, especially once you factor in rule changes since adapting upgrades has a 0% failure rate anyway. I needed all 4 of those car upgrade departments at spec 1 since after I'd completed just one race, I'd already nearly run out of aerodynamic and chassis upgrades I could even buy without upgrading those departments to spec 1. The powertrain department didn't need to be touched for a while since every part of it was upgraded once because I told Will Buxton I was proud of that department, which I guess makes sense to somebody. The Hungarian Grand Prix is worth mentioning because it threw up an unusual result this season, and that's something it does regularly throughout the career. Max Verstappen won it, taking his only race win of the season. Outside of Hungary, he never finished above 3rd, and almost every other race was won by Mercedes, although Leclerc was able to bag a couple of wins because the performance update didn't get installed until Season 9. So thanks to Codemasters taking forever to introduce 2020 car performances to the 2020 game, Ferrari did a lot better than they ever should have done. 3 major things happened in Russia. 1, an aerodynamic rule change was announced to be coming in after just 1 year of car development. Number 2, Romain Grosjean announced he was going to retire at the end of the season. And 3, Valtteri Bottas won the Drivers' Championship with a race to spare, and Mercedes wrapped up the Constructors' Championship. I'm not going to lie and say I saw a Bottas Championship win coming, because I didn't. Especially since Codemasters are now transparent about the ratings of each driver, so Lewis Hamilton, statistically and rating wise the better driver, lost out to Bottas. Sure, it was only a 10 race long season, but Bottas still ended with a 45-point margin over Hamilton, which is some going since Hamilton starts the career as the best driver in the game. Ferrari were the second best team, with Leclerc beating Vettel to 3rd in the standings. Doesn't make any sense though, since Ferrari started and ended the year with a worse car than Red Bull. Leclerc is also always lower rated than Vettel, but the experience stats skews that a lot. In the other 3 stats, the 3 which actually determine how quick a driver is on track, Leclerc's ratings are as good or better than Vettel's. From there it's all fairly standard, with Ricciardo's high ratings helping him to be by far the best performing driver not from the big 3 teams. Both McLaren drivers finished almost on a par with each other, especially when compared to Racing Point and AlphaTauri, since Perez and Kvyat both scored 17 points, whereas Stroll only got 3, and the real-life Italian Grand Prix race winner Gasly, he only got 1 point. I scored 8 points, with almost all of them coming from the Dutch Grand Prix, which I did, but I also got 2 points from a simmed Austrian Grand Prix. Mick meanwhile ended the season pointless, along with both Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams drivers. In the Constructors, it's Mercedes on top in Season 1, with Ferrari a surprise 2nd and ahead of Red Bull. Ricciardo's pace and Renault's speedy development put them 4th and ahead of McLaren, but Racing Point beat AlphaTauri despite ending the season with a worse car. My team was the last to score points. In terms of car development, Renault go into the 2nd season ahead of McLaren, with AlphaTauri ahead of Racing Point and us. Aside from that, it ends exactly as it started, albeit with Williams dropping even further behind the rest of the pack. Grosjean's retirement meant Haas brought in Latifi as a replacement, something which I can't quite see happening in the real world, but filling his seat at Williams is the first Formula 2 driver to make his way into F1 after Mick Schumacher, and of all of them is Nobuharu Matsushita, who is by no means the highest rated Formula 2 driver. He does have a better rating than Schumacher though, which means I'm still fielding the worst driver on the grid as my teammate. I do, however, still have the best engine, as I left Ferrari to go with Renault, who now have a 100 performance engine, 3 more than Ferrari have now and 6 more than they had last year. It wasn't just my team that benefited from the maxed out Renault power unit, as Ricciardo in the works Renault finished 3rd at Monaco. Daniel Ricciardo was also on the bottom step of the podium in Britain and Belgium. This is something you'll start to notice a lot more in future seasons, but for some reason the rating of your engine supplier doesn't affect your car's overall rating in the car performance index. So PSL Racing and Renault are worse on paper than we are in actuality, since we have the best engine, and supplier upgrades are on the development tree, so why the index doesn't reflect them is a mystery. Also, it explains how Ferrari beat Red Bull last year with what the game says was a worse car, because it didn't factor in the difference between the Ferrari engine, which was the best, and the Honda engine, which was the worst in Season 1. You could analyse the cars in the season for as long as you want, but it doesn't stop the inevitable fact that Mercedes were the team to beat still, and nobody beat them. They won the Constructors' Championship in Russia, but the Drivers' Championship went to the final round, albeit barely. Bottas may well have scored the full 26 points in both of the final 2 rounds, but his teammate Lewis Hamilton won the Drivers' Championship in Abu Dhabi, matching Michael Schumacher's tally of 7 Drivers' Championships. 15 points was the gap between Bottas and Hamilton in the end, with Verstappen 3rd, Leclerc 4th, and then Renault's Ricciardo moving ahead of Albon at the final round. Vettel ends his time in F1 with a pretty low, as he scored just over half as many points as his teammate. I scored 30 points, which is pretty good, as I beat both McLaren drivers, and that's with me DNFing the final 2 races due to needing to not sim those races so I could see the Drivers' Championship winning cutscene. Both AlphaTauri drivers and Perez were the last to score points, with Stroll, Schumacher, and then both Alfa Romeo, Haas and Williams drivers all scoring no points. The Constructors' Championship ended in more or less the order it should have done given the car performance ratings at the start of the shortened season. The only exceptions to that are the trio of PSL Racing, Racing Point and AlphaTauri. As Crofty would say, the driver-owner team finished in 6th, which is good considering we started the season with the 8th best car, but less impressive when you know I ended it with the 2nd quickest car on the grid. This is why I prioritise buying resource point generation facility upgrades, since you almost can't spend them quickly enough, and you catch up to the front so quickly once you've got hundreds of resource points flooding in every week. Racing Point both started and ended Season 2 with a better car than AlphaTauri, yet finished behind them. I'd love to be able to tell you why, but Perez was higher rated than both Gasly and Kvyat, and the Mercedes engine was better than Honda's. Mick Schumacher agreed to stay with me for another year, the intention being to keep him until he wins a championship. We'll see if he can follow in the footsteps of his father, something which Vettel tried to do when he moved to Ferrari, but that dream's over with Vettel having left F1 for good. Ricciardo took his place alongside Leclerc, with Gasly joining the French team of Renault in his place, and Raikkonen moved to AlphaTauri. That left the door open for Jack Aitken to join F1, taking over Raikkonen's old place at Alfa Romeo. I stuck with Renault engines for the 3rd season, and that's because the ratings for all the suppliers stayed the same. I'm happy to be loyal to a firm though, since it means I get to keep all of the supplier upgrades that are on the far right of the powertrain upgrade tree. With my team now having the 2nd best car on the grid at the start of the year, I thought now was a good time to upgrade all of the personnel facilities to Spec 2, which took Schumacher up from 68 to 78 rated. In time for the Hungarian Grand Prix, PSL Racing had the fastest car, a fact which I instantly took advantage of as I won a simulated Hungarian Grand Prix. That's my first win in the career and the first of oh so many wins for the team. Russia saw the team's first 1-2 result, with Schumacher leading the way. It's a shame we left it too late in the year to fight for either championship, as both Red Bull and Mercedes drivers had already outscored us by that point. Bottas went on to become a double world champion in Abu Dhabi as he beat Hamilton to the top of the table by 9 points. Schumacher took the checkered flag though and the fastest lap, and my DNF to see Bottas win the championship meant Schumacher beat me to 5th in the standings. To be fair though, he does deserve it given that he beat me at Zandvoort this year. Albon, against all odds, beat Verstappen to 3rd in the championship, and Ricciardo yet again dragged every ounce of performance from his car as he finished 7th in the championship again, and he bested both drivers from his former team as well as his current teammate. It makes perfect sense though when you realise that at the end of this year he was 92 overall, 3 higher than Leclerc and the 3rd best driver in F1. Only the top 13 drivers scored points, with both McLaren's and Kvyat the last to do so. That meant Kimi Raikkonen ended with no points to his name at the end of his first season with the 3rd Italian team he's raced for. Neither Racing Point, Alfa Romeo, Haas or Williams drivers scored points as well. Given what I've said, the Constructors' Championship is largely spoken for, but I'll point out that Mercedes outscored Red Bull by 46 points, with PSL Racing only 93 away from the top. Ferrari, largely thanks to them having the 3rd and 4th best drivers in F1, beat Renault by 6 points. In Italy, a rule change was confirmed to affect the chassis, powertrain and durability departments. So it's a good thing I hadn't bought any durability upgrades, because why would I buy them over any performance upgrade? I was able to save all but 4 of my chassis upgrades and all but 2 of my powertrain upgrades, obviously excluding the supplier provided ones. You'll be disappointed to know though, since again this was the early days of F1 2020, that the rule change on the surface did absolutely nothing. This was fixed in later versions of the game, but at this point in the career I'm still on version 1.07. I wanted to keep Mick Schumacher on board given the Schumacher theme of my team and this game as a whole. For the sake of variety I was going to draft in other drivers eventually, but only after I gave the Schumacher family another championship. However, despite the fact he started to win races with us and almost certainly would win the Drivers' Championship if he stuck with us for this coming year, apparently our marketing department wasn't good enough. The problem is his acclaim had risen a lot, and so too had his demands of a team. But surely the Schumacher name is enough of a marketing tool in of itself, and don't F1 drivers hate marketing and PR duties? So why would he care, especially when he's on the verge of winning a championship? In his place I bought in Kimi Raikkonen, partly because who doesn't like Raikkonen, but also because I'm astonished 2 drivers have retired by this point in the career mode and neither of them have been him. In both of the other 2 My Team career modes I've run on this game, he's retired at the end of the first season, so I may as well have him on board whilst he's still available. I went with this space themed livery, partly because I like it and it's so unique. Just a shame I can't run without any sponsors Honda 2007 style, since I'm not desperate for money anymore. Also, this year in real life Toro Rosso changed to AlphaTauri and I love the new name because it's so clever. It's the name of a giant red star in the Taurus constellation. In other words, Red Bull. More to the point, it's an astronomy based name, so I thought I'd join them by having an astronomy based livery and race suit. Fittingly, given Honda's aforementioned 2007 F1 livery, I went with them for engines since theirs are the best after the rule change, which lowered the quality of everyone's engines a lot. With Mick unwilling to stay with PSL Racing just as we're on the verge of dominating F1, he instead went to Haas. That seat became available because Kevin Magnussen left him to take Raikkonen's old place at AlphaTauri. After the Monaco Grand Prix, I upgraded the simulator and fitness centre to their maximum. I left out the analysis suite since Raikkonen can't have his experience stat boosted any more than it already is, and experience doesn't correlate to on-track performance anyway. Raikkonen spent the majority of the season rated 95 or higher, yet I beat him in every simmed race. The only race where Raikkonen finished ahead of me was the Italian Grand Prix, and that's probably because I took part in it. In my defence, I will say that I was running a dry weather setup and it was intermediate tyre conditions, plus I got some minor front wing damage after getting caught out by just how slowly he was moving when he was stuck behind Lando Norris. That gave me a longer pit stop, but by the end me and Raikkonen did very well considering we started in 7th and 8th and climbed our way up to 3rd and 4th. We even passed Ricciardo in a Ferrari with ease, as Raikkonen got by and I took advantage of the frustrated Aussie and went by just a few seconds later. Raikkonen may have beaten me, but the fact of the matter is, if I won in Italy then I would have won every race in the season. so it's no surprise that I took the Drivers' Championship with a fifth of the season still to run. Raikkonen's the clear next best driver though, so we'd already wrapped up the Constructors' Championship by the end of the Italian GP. We had a 153 point lead over Ferrari in second. That's nearly twice as many points. Calling Ricciardo frustrated in Monza was perhaps an understatement, since he announced at the very next race that he was going to leave the sport entirely at the end of the year. He didn't do that badly though, since he finished 4th in the standings and ahead of both overperforming AlphaTauri drivers, as well as both Mercedes and Red Bull drivers. Ultimately though, Leclerc still got the better of him, albeit by only 7 points. But Ricciardo is the third best driver in the sport, so him deciding to leave is quite a big loss. Norris was the final driver to get a double-figure points count, with Gasly, Stroll and Sainz all on 6 points, and Ocon was the final driver to grab any points in the 4th season, fittingly scoring 4. Despite starting the season with the 4th best car and ending it with the 5th best, Ferrari was still the best performing real-world team. Of course, all of this was recorded before the performance update that does come in at the end of the career and absolutely wrecks Ferrari and Alfa Romeo, as well as turns Haas into almost a comedy team. AlphaTauri finished 3rd in the Constructors and ahead of Red Bull, which is one hell of a jump for a team that until very recently was trading places with Racing Point in the Performance Index. AlphaTauri were, excluding my team, by far the most improved team throughout the season, as they had the 4th best car by the end of the year, yet they outperformed even that and beat their sister team. That's in spite of the fact that both teams used Honda engines and Red Bull's driver lineup is better. Mercedes meanwhile underperformed, given that they have the 2nd best car, 2 of the best drivers and the 2nd best engine. There was a rule change from Season 4 to Season 5 and who knows what happened. According to the graph, it was all business as usual during the transition from one year to the next. What did change heading into the 5th season was my engine supplier yet again, jumping ship from Honda to Mercedes since the rule change hit the Japanese firm hard. I also changed my team sponsor to TriStar since it suits my livery, although Equinox would also have worked. It says a lot about how easy it is to manage a team in this game, since less than halfway into the career I'm picking sponsors based on their name and not their funding or objectives. Even before this year I would have happily run with no sponsors at all, since I don't need them and very soon I won't need any sponsorship funding at all, and a company's logo just ruins the look of my car. I should probably explain how I'm in such a comfortable position, and that's because by this point all of my facilities are Spec 3. That means I should be able to meet any driver's requirements, and I've done that so quickly because for each facility only one part of it needs to be at Spec 3 for the entire department to be at Spec 3, which is a questionable game design choice. The personnel facility is almost maxed out. The activities management part of the marketing facility is at its best, so Mick Schumacher would be happy. And all of the car part facilities are at Spec 3 because their resource generation is as good as it can be. It's so good, I earn 800 resource points a week, and that's on top of what I get from practice programs and activities. And that's why PSL Racing will be at the top of F1 until the end of this 10-season career, since I have too many resources to ever fall back down the pack. Ricciardo's retirement caused only 2 driver changes. The first was his former teammate Esteban Ocon taking over his old seat at Ferrari, which meant that Formula 2 graduate Nick De Vries could hop into F1 with Renault. A 100 rated Raikkonen beat me at Zandvoort, but every race after then I beat him. Sure, most of them were simmed races, but I did the Belgian Grand Prix and that was a pretty easy win. I purposely retired from the next 3 races to ensure he would win the Drivers' Championship. I've already won one, and since my team will forever be the quickest, I almost feel as if it's my duty to make as many different people world champions as possible. I know he won the title in 2007, but who doesn't want to see Kimi win another one, and also, who is just amazed that he hasn't retired by now? Kimi won the Season 5 Drivers' Championship by 40 points over me and 75 over Bottas, who was the leading Mercedes driver. Albon beat Verstappen, and the Red Bull pair along with Stroll separate one Ferrari driver from the other as Leclerc scored 88 points versus Ocon's 23. Long-standing AlphaTauri driver Kvyat scored almost all the team's points and ended the season ahead of Norris, Sainz, Perez, Russell, and then you get to Magnussen in the other AlphaTauri. You heard correctly though, George Russell beat Kevin Magnussen. That means Russell scored his personal as well as Williams' first points in the career. 1 point came from a 10th place at Monaco, with the other 4 coming from a remarkable 8th place in Hungary. The Hungaroring often throws up an unusual result, and we even saw that way back in the first season, but George Russell was phenomenal this year. To be fair though, Williams no longer had the worst car, they had the second worst, as Haas had sunk below them. What also helped Williams was the fact that the Mercedes engine is the best, and not by a small margin, as its performance rating is at least 10 better than the others. Finally, George Russell had developed to an 88 overall rating. That makes him the 5th best driver in F1. Given his age and potential, that's totally fair, but he even has a higher rating now than Lando Norris. That's why I signed Russell for the 6th season, and I had to do the silly auction thing to get him, but as I've said before, money is so easy to make in this game that I had no trouble in outbidding Williams for him. Going back to the Constructors' Championship quickly, you can tell how critical engine performance is, since a comparatively great Mercedes engine gave Williams points, whereas a now awful Honda engine meant AlphaTauri finished in 7th. I'd love to end that there, but Red Bull had only a slightly better car than their sister team, and the same engine, but were the 3rd best performing team. I know they've got Verstappen, who's 95 rated now, but Albon beat him and he's 10 overall lower. I know both of them have got higher ratings than Kvyat and Magnussen, but surely that can't be the sole reason for the massive difference in success the two teams had, especially since last year AlphaTauri defied all logic and beat Red Bull with the same driver pairing that they have this year. The second half of this career started off on version 1.08, which amongst other things made the Vehicle Performance Index actually update after a rule change happened. More interestingly, to celebrate having a British driver on the team, the livery and race suits went fully British. So I've gone from a Schumacher themed team to a British team. And yet again I've changed engine suppliers, since everyone improved their power units, but Ferrari did the works and made theirs unbeatable. Me ditching Raikkonen and Valtteri Bottas retiring had a lot of knock-on effects. The prized second seat at Mercedes was up for grabs, and it was taken by now double world champion Kimi Raikkonen. De Vries took up Russell's old spot at Williams after just 1 year with Renault. It also means Williams now have a driver lineup comprised entirely of drivers who started this career save in Formula 2. Latifi hopped from Haas to Renault, definitely a smart move, and Guan Yu Zhou is the latest F2 driver to make the leap into F1. Russell, with all of my facility upgrades, was 99 overall as standard, but could be up to 100 with some extra experience training. Since experience only relates to resource points earned during practice sessions, to all intents and purposes, Russell was as quick as a driver can be this entire season. Season 6 was an absolute walkover for us. Russell outscored me by 100 points, and us two were the only ones to make it into triple figures. Verstappen, in the inferior car with the inferior engine, beat Lewis Hamilton to 3rd, and then Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc both ended the season on 72 points. Sainz outscored Ocon by 2 points though to put McLaren ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors. Way down the order, Albon underperformed, despite the fact he beat Verstappen last season. both AlphaTauris ended the year on 36 points, which was 4 more than Gasly for Renault, 22 more than Stroll, and 31 more than Raikkonen. Yes, Kimi Raikkonen in a Mercedes, which the game says is still the second best car on the grid, only scored 5 points. That's 75 less than Hamilton. No wonder I had to self-sabotage to give him a championship. Perez was the last to score points, with Latifi in the second Renault ending on 0, but ahead of both Alfa Romeos, Haas and Williams. Raikkonen's shocking performance meant Mercedes were outscored by Red Bull, McLaren and Ferrari. McLaren beating Ferrari may seem odd, and do you know what it is? McLaren did end with the better car, but they only had it for the final 2 races, and Ferrari had the better base power unit. It's not like the driver ratings would come into it, since Leclerc is still better than Norris by 5 overall. The Hamilton and Verstappen battle is an interesting one, since just before the British Grand Prix, Verstappen was 96 rated and the best driver on the grid. I then installed the first driver ratings update put out by Codemasters, and it put Hamilton up to 96 and Verstappen down to 95. That's despite the fact the update should have lowered Hamilton's awareness, but in my game save it didn't, but it did up his pace. Verstappen's base ratings were upped by 1 in awareness and 2 in pace. Neither of those happened in this game save, but his experience did go down by 1 more than it should have done. So, all things considered, given that he had a worse car with a worse engine and was made a worse driver just under halfway into the season, Verstappen did exceptionally well to beat Hamilton. One final observation to do with that is that Codemasters never made a big announcement about Formula 2 drivers having their ratings changed. But what I did notice was that Zhou's overall went up by 4, which is pretty hard to ignore. With the game now able to show who lost out from rule changes, you can see PSL Racing stayed stagnant whilst everyone else fell back to some extent. AlphaTauri now have the 3rd best car, even though you can't really see their bar, but if you zoom in, it's there and just below Mercedes. Racing Point lost less than the rest of the mid-pack, but are still behind them all, whilst Alfa Romeo were able to keep enough upgrades to get back in front of Williams, who hemorrhaged them. Haas had the worst car before the rule changes, and they still do afterwards. With no powertrain rule change, the engine stayed more or less the same performance-wise. Honda improved but still have the least powerful engine. Everybody's durability went for a bird, and not like I care, since Ferrari still have the best performing and most durable engine, so I stuck with them. My team stayed almost exactly the same, since I didn't want to change livery so soon. So I got in Jack Aitken to replace George Russell. The logic being that by this point Jack Aitken is better than Kimi Raikkonen, but worse than George Russell. I had to self-sabotage to get Kimi to be a world champion, but Russell trounced me near constantly. I want to see how far down the ladder of drivers you can go before they become incapable of winning a driver's championship, even with what is by far the best car on the grid. Now Formula 1 world champion Russell took over Aitken's old place at Alfa Romeo, whilst fellow Brit Callum Ilott went to AlphaTauri now that Kevin Magnussen's retired. I beat Aitken in the Dutch Grand Prix, but that's only because his pole position turned into 11th. That's despite the fact it's the start of the season, we have an engine with the best durability, and just before this race, I bought the final durability upgrade to have every single non-supplied car upgrade. I then won the Spanish Grand Prix, carrying on my 100% win record over my teammates in Spain, despite every race I've ever done there being simulated. From then on, Aitken won every single race before winning the Drivers' Championship. He becomes the 6th different driver to win a Drivers' Championship in this career, and, including me, the 4th British driver to be crowned champion. Once that was over, I won a simulated Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, beating Aitken for only the 3rd time in the year. Danny Kvyat finished 3rd in the standings, beating Leclerc in 4th and Verstappen in 5th. Gasly ended up in 6th with Ilott and the other AlphaTauri in 7th, which is ahead of Albon, Ocon, Norris and then Hamilton, who didn't even make the top 10. All of this is beyond explanation given how the car performance index lined up at the start and end of the season. The driver ratings are pretty much as you would expect, and the performance of the engines is in the same order it was at the start of the career. How Mercedes did so badly with Raikkonen only scoring 2 points, how Stroll beat his Racing Point teammate Perez, and how AlphaTauri ended as the second highest scoring team in the Constructors' Championship is all beyond rational explanation. At the start of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, a powertrain rule change was confirmed. That's very short notice, but luckily I was able to save every non-supplied upgrade, and with 28,000 resource points spare. It also had a profound effect on the 4 engines as, in performance terms alone, they were almost equal. They were also far from great as Renault, Ferrari and Honda were all at 80 performance, but Mercedes had the marginal edge, so I went with them. Also, just in case you're interested, because it doesn't really matter given the past 7 seasons, but here's how quick each of the team's cars supposedly are now. In time for the new season, I went with a new teammate and I wanted to lower the bar again since Aitken proved more than capable of winning with a top car, so I went with Tatiana Calderon. Not only is she one of the lowest rated drivers in the game, but if she can pull this off, then she'll become the first female Formula 1 world champion ever. It's going to help that just by joining the team, her rating shot up from 65 to 80 thanks to our facilities. Sergio Setti Camara was the other Formula 2 driver to make the jump into F1 this year as he joined Haas. That's because Mick Schumacher left them to go to Racing Point, and Stroll finally left the team his dad owns to go to the team that almost always overperforms, AlphaTauri. The 2 casualties from all of these driver changes were Callum Ilott and Jack Aitken. Both Brits were unable to find a seat in F1 since AlphaTauri favoured Stroll over Ilott, and it's not even like Ilott did that badly this season. Nobody wanted reigning world champion Jack Aitken despite the fact he had a seat in F1 even before I signed him. Since I've now got a Colombian in the team, it was time to change the team's branding, so I went with this. It was the most interesting one that was left, it had matching race suits, and that's about it. Some pre-season training put Calderon up to 90 rated for the Dutch Grand Prix, that's 1 higher than George Russell. It showed in qualifying as she took pole position by nearly 9/10 of a second over Norris, whilst I was down in 5th. This was all on 101 AI by the way. Thankfully, I proved to be much more competitive on Sunday as I got up to 2nd easily, but Calderon was still pulling away from me. That was until we pitted as the tables turned once we were both on the mediums, with me ultimately beating her by over 7 seconds. That set the tone for the remaining 9 races, as I and Lance Stroll beat Calderon in Spain, and then in Monaco, she did complete a PSL Racing 1-2 but the back end of it. In a simulated British Grand Prix, Calderon finished down in 6th for her joint lowest result of the year. She then ended 3rd in Hungary whilst I won again, and so to give her the vaguest hope of winning the title, I retired from the Belgian, Italian and Russian Grand Prix since I was 62 points ahead of her. It was too little too late though, as she never properly came back into contention, and by the time you get to the end of the Russian Grand Prix, she had fallen behind Lance Stroll and I was only 11 points ahead of him. So all hopes of keeping the streak of Drivers' Championships at PSL Racing going rested with me. So I had to take part in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and whilst I got pole position, I quickly lost that first place and then some, and I wasn't helped when Calderon was overtaken by Stroll. Thankfully I worked my way back past Kvyat and Calderon to cross the line in 2nd and become a 2-time world champion. Calderon meanwhile dropped behind not only myself, but also Kvyat and both McLarens to have a joint lowest result of the season with 6th. My 18 points plus the bonus one for fastest lap meant I outscored Lance Stroll by a mere 5 points. Calderon was good enough for 3rd in the championship, beating the other AlphaTauri of Kvyat. Norris beat Leclerc with both of them still at the same teams after 8 years of racing, but Then again, the same could be said for Sainz in 7th and Verstappen in 8th. George Russell was able to score points for Williams a few seasons ago, and he's done the same thing for Alfa Romeo this year, accruing 18 in total and beating both racing points of Schumacher and Perez. Mercedes sunk to their lowest level ever as 7-time champion Lewis Hamilton scored 2 points, which to be fair is twice as many as his teammate Raikkonen. Mercedes did become a midfield team on paper, but they're still a works team and their engines are still the best. Never mind how Hamilton is always either the best or second best driver in the sport. Mercedes finished 9th in the Constructors' Championship, and the only teams they beat were the 2 that didn't score any points. In Russia, a chassis and aerodynamic rule change was announced, and yet again I was safe as I had enough resource points to adapt all of them instantly, and then have another 33,000 on top. The rule change did make lines move on the screen, with Mercedes supposedly having the best car except for Mars, but you interpret that however you want. Honda engines were the ones to get now, so I bought them in with their 100 performance and durability ratings. Mercedes and Renault produced identical power units and Ferrari the worst by a tiny margin. Calderon had her shot at winning a title and she blew it. So I needed someone who was worse than Aitken but better than Calderon, and do you know what? Mick Schumacher fits that bill. By this point in time, Mick Schumacher had gone up to 79 overall, which was boosted to 93 from facilities alone. That's a far cry from the 71 rating he had when he was last with the team 6 seasons ago, which I was only able to up to 81 at the time. Jack Aitken stepped into Mick's old seat at Racing Point, and that's the only driver change. Well, Calderon dropped out of F1 entirely, but is that even a surprise? To encapsulate how slow Codemasters were with bringing out the performance update, it wasn't until Season 9 that it got integrated into this career mode. It's the update that recognises Racing Point as a properly competitive team, thanks to their pink Mercedes, and destroys the 3 Ferrari engine teams. Haas still have the worst car, with Alfa Romeo not far ahead as they fell behind Williams. But the main Ferrari team, who already only had the 7th best car of the 11 on the grid, dropped behind Racing Point and to 8th. In fact, Racing Point's boost put them up to 4th and just behind Red Bull. In Hungary, Esteban Ocon for Ferrari finished in 3rd. It was the only time he finished on the podium all year, one of only 3 points finishes he got all year, and it's pretty much the only reason Ocon outscored his teammate Leclerc this season. There's no explanation as to how he achieved that, since Ferrari's car is one of the worst, the Ferrari engine is the worst, and whilst Ocon was the 4th best driver still in F1, he's still considerably worse than Leclerc, who only finished 8th in Hungary. And you may be thinking, well, maybe Ferrari's car has an amazing chassis or aero to make up for it, since the Hungaroring isn't exactly a power circuit. Well, no, since they only had the 8th best chassis and the 7th best aero. That race aside, the season played out as expected, with Mick Schumacher winning a Drivers' Championship with a race spare. That's now the 8th World Drivers' Championship for the Schumacher family. That said, the season still wouldn't end without one final oddity, and it was an entirely wet Abu Dhabi race, despite the track being situated in the middle of a desert. Outside of my team, it was very close at the top, as Albon ended with 94 points, 1 ahead of his teammate Verstappen and 3 ahead of Norris. Gasly was the next best, with both AlphaTauris and Sainz just behind. Despite Mercedes starting and ending the season with the 2nd best car and the 2nd best engine, Hamilton only got 22 points and Raikkonen only 2. Sure, Raikkonen would be 49 years old by now, so I'll cut him some slack, but Hamilton would still be 43. That's a combined driver age at Mercedes of 92, but their lack of points means they were beaten by Racing Point and Ferrari. Sure, that's largely down to the weird Hungarian Grand Prix and the fact that Raikkonen is really past it now, but even if you ignore Mercedes, how did Ferrari beat Racing Point? Also, whilst we're on that topic, how did Renault beat AlphaTauri given the car ratings at the start of the year, the end of the year, and the fact the Honda engine was perfect whilst Renault's wasn't? Despite Albon beating Verstappen this year and still being one of the youngest drivers on the grid, he retired at the end of the penultimate season. Lando Norris finally left McLaren after 9 years in this game alone, as he left Woking for Milton Keynes. That stimulated some extra life into the driver market since Perez left Racing Point years after he willed in reality to go to McLaren. I got rid of Mick Schumacher to give one final driver the opportunity to win a Drivers' Championship. Mick went to Racing Point whilst I brought in the infamous legend Mahavir Raghunathan. I know a couple of other F1 YouTubers have made videos of him on this game just to see if they can get him to win a race, never mind a championship. This time though he's in a team with the best engine on the grid and with all the engines having exactly the same ratings as they did when Schumacher won races and a championship last season. Me and Raghunathan also have the best car in general, as if that was in doubt. Facility upgrades take him up from 50 to 65 overall, but honestly that still makes him the joint third worst driver in the game. I'm going to make a totally separate video chronicling in detail Raghunathan's season, in which I simulated half the races and raced in the other half just so I can see how bad he really is. If you want a snippet as to how that went, here he is crashing. Unsurprisingly, given that Raikkonen needed help to win his title and Calderon didn't quite make the grade, Raghunathan didn't have a hope in hell. Just to give you some quick context, here is how quick each of the team's cars were at the end of the season. Sure, the other teams had caught up and AlphaTauri weren't that far behind us, but we still have the best car on the grid by some margin. With the help of some end of season 9 training and the massive boost you get from pre-season training, Raghunathan went up to 76 rated for the first round of the season. That was enough for him to genuinely finish 5th at Zandvoort and on merit. He wasn't just a moving chicane either, as he started the race in 9th. From there he only made it into the points one other time, as he no longer had the benefit of the pre-season boost, and he sunk to a low of 19th twice. That's 19th out of 22 drivers with the best car on the grid, a car I won my 3rd Drivers' Championship in, and in doing so became the most successful driver in this career save. That's honestly it, and you can look up and down the Drivers' Championship and draw your own conclusions based on how good we know the engines were this season and how good the cars apparently were relative to each other. All I will say is that Raghunathan was good enough, or maybe just absurdly lucky enough, to scrape together enough points for PSL Racing to beat AlphaTauri. He scored 11 points and we only beat them by 9, which meant PSL Racing took their 7th consecutive Constructors' Championship, matching what Mercedes did recently in real life. I'm aware I haven't talked much about the driver ratings and how they've changed over the course of the career saves, so here is how they've ended up after 10 years in F1. Well, those who made it the full 10 years. I should also say that at the end of the 9th season I installed the 2nd Codemasters driver rating update, so that is also having an effect on what you're seeing. I don't have the infinite time needed to talk about driver rating changes, but what I will talk about for a brief moment is the driver transfers. Before the game came out, Lee Mather talked about there being a very live and active driver market, and that the reasons why a driver would move teams being very tightly constrained, so there wouldn't be some of the crazy moves that certainly I saw in my all 10 seasons of F1 2019 career mode. He also mentioned that you'll be able to see a lot of the reasons why a driver would choose to move teams, and that it doesn't just come down to whether or not a team can afford them, but whether that team is attractive to that driver in the first place. I guess that's all true for F1 2020, but then again, you never know how much money each of the teams has, and by the end of it, most of them, if not all of them, should be absurdly rich. There weren't any situations like Hamilton jumping to Toro Rosso and then back to Mercedes, like we saw in my F1 2019 all 10 seasons of career mode video, but then again, there were mid-season driver transfers in that career save, whereas there weren't for this one. On the other hand though, I'd argue it's just become a much more boring driver market. I mean, in 10 years, Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz, Kvyat and Giovinazzi never left their starting teams. Matsushita joined Williams at the start of the second season because Grosjean retired, and in 9 years he never left them. Even ignoring driver academies and other real life arrangements, I don't know why Williams would pick Matsushita over any other Formula 2 driver. In fact, in a My Team career mode save I did for a couple of articles I wrote for the race, Bottas retired at the end of the third season and in his place came Matsushita. Not Verstappen or Leclerc or Vettel or Russell of course, as we've seen recently in real life. Not anyone you would expect to fill the second seat at Mercedes. Instead it was Nobuharu Matsushita. Sure, Mercedes is attractive to him, but is he someone Mercedes would willingly want in their team? Drivers can't just join any team that has a free seat. Teams have to want them, and that seems to be the flaw in this game's logic. It's great to see that the young drivers with lots of potential had their overall shoot up throughout the career, whereas others understandably stayed more static and others inevitably dropped. Since Raikkonen unbelievably never retired in this career save, we know his overall falls from 87 to 76, although a couple of Codemasters driver rating changes did affect that. What that means is that Kimi Raikkonen at 50 years old is as good as a near prime Mahavir Raghunathan. The final point I have to mention before I wrap up this video is the inevitability of AlphaTauri emerging as a front-running team. They did it multiple times in this career, sometimes against all logic and reasoning, yet in my career save I ran for the race, they were unstoppable. I deliberately let some car upgrades go for the sake of screenshot variety, but even still, at the start of the 10th season I had the best car, yet they still beat me. I even did the Mexican Grand Prix to see if it was a glitch with the race simulations, but me and my teammate Albon finished in 4th and 5th. Luca Ghiotto for Renault, Max Verstappen for Mercedes and Guan Yu Zhou for AlphaTauri all beat me, and I was properly going for it. The only reason we beat Kvyat and the other AlphaTauri was because he retired, and the only reason we were so close to Zhou at the end was because a late race safety car bunched us all back up. If it wasn't for those two things, it would have been a clear AlphaTauri won too. They won both championships in the 10th and final season with Kvyat the drivers' champion. Also in the previous season, Charles Leclerc won the drivers' championship whilst a part of AlphaTauri. It is also worth noting that the driver market was much more interesting in that game save. I don't know if it's because I changed teammates far less often in that one, or maybe I was just lucky or perhaps unlucky with the one I actually recorded for YouTube. I mean, Hamilton and Vettel were teammates at Ferrari at one point in that career save. Vettel beat Hamilton, which is the exact opposite of what occurred in my F1 2019 career save when those two were teammates. For those curious how the My Team mode ends, well, you complete the final race, you're then taken to the usual end of race screen where it updates you on your rivalry, sponsor goals and bank balance. And then it boots you back to the main menu. You'd think it wasn't possible, but it means these F1 career modes have ended ever more unceremoniously ever since F1 2016's, and it's not like I'd call F1 2016's ending a wonderful farewell. Anyway, that's everything I have to say in this mammoth of an all seasons of career mode video, my first one ever on a My Team mode, and hopefully Codemasters continue to improve their My Team mode in future games, since a driver manager mode has a lot of potential. I mean, FIFA manager modes have been a thing for, what, about 15 years? So it's great to see the F1 games finally catching up and almost matching the FIFA games in that respect. Anyway, I'll see you guys on my all 10 seasons of Dutch Grand Prix videos that'll be supporting this, but before then will be the Chronicles of Raghunathan and a deep dive into just how badly he did despite being at a perfect team with a near perfect car. So I'll see you guys then.